Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Good evening, everybody. How y'all doing? This is Jay Scott. It is another episode of The Hook Rocks, the Ultimate Rock Community Podcast. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're doing as good as can be. As I've mentioned before on previous podcasts, stay healthy, stay strong, keep smiling. We'll get through all this sooner or later. I think the light is there at the end of the tunnel, and I think we're approaching it, and I think before we know it, we're going to have a new normal with masks and social distancing, but hey, at least we'll be able to get out of the house. Like to welcome in our next guest. It's been a while since she's been on the podcast. It's been, like 6 months. I think the last episode we did was about Greta Van Fleet, but I'd like to welcome in Ari Karnezis at Twitter, on Twitter at Ari_McKay. What's going on, Ari? How are you?
Hi, Jay. Oh my God, it's so good to be back. I miss doing episodes on this podcast.
Yeah, you know what? I know we've been talking about doing a few different things over the last couple months, and it just, I don't know if it's just been timing or just because my schedule fills up so fast now, but...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then plus your schedule, right? You just got done with finals with your junior year of college, so congrats on that. And one more year.
Thank you.
Yeah, one more year to go. And so I'm just happy to have you back, and I'm happy to discuss the next topic, which is remembering Chris Cornell on his 3 years of his passing back in Michigan after a show. And just the impact his death has had and what's the latest on his legacy. Where are you at with everything with Chris Cornell? I mean, I know your video blog on YouTube is what inspired me to contact you on our first episode regarding Chris Cornell. How have you coped? Have there been moments where it's been difficult? Have you began to enjoy his music more? What's that been like?
Absolutely. I would say it's been a little bit of both. I've noticed, being a grunge fan for so many years, Soundgarden has been the band that I've been listening to most consistently. It's never, I'm always putting on like a Soundgarden song, at any given moment. And as much as I love the other bands, like I said, Soundgarden is like that band that I can never, ever get sick of. I've been listening to them for like almost 10 years now. And it does get hard sometimes thinking about, Chris Cornell passing away at such a young age. And so suddenly sometimes it reminds me of how it affected me. I never cried over a celebrity before, but I cried for a really long time when I found out he died. But looking back, it's like, I'm just glad that I was introduced to his music so many years ago. And I'm grateful I'm grateful for what he was able to bring to so many fans around the world, including me.
Yeah, I have the same type of feelings where I get sad when I realize there's not going to be any more new music. You know, the music, even if they do release unreleased stuff, which maybe there is material, maybe there's not, I don't really know. But I do get saddened when I know that the Audio Slave reunion will never happen. I know there was talks to do that. I know that, you know, the circumstances around his death have been questioned in terms that, you know, did he intend to commit suicide as his death has been labeled? I fall on the side where I don't. I think, you know, we all watch these pharmaceutical commercials, and we all watch these, you know, when they get to the end of these commercials and they say side effects may include this and this and this and this and this, and they give like this checklist of things. And sometimes some of the medication causes suicidal thoughts. And I believe the drug that he was on did have that as a side effect. I do know that he was maybe taking more than he should have. I know there's been reports out there for that. I think that's been confirmed. So obviously the more dosage you take, the increase in potential side effects affecting you becomes greater, obviously. So I think with him being on that medication and maybe no one to really monitor it, affected his mind, affected his decision-making, affected his emotions. And when he gets back to the hotel room in Michigan after the show, he decides to take his own life. And it just didn't make sense. I remember making breakfast for my son and I have the phone in one hand, and I'm scrolling through breaking news, and I'm cooking eggs, and I see Chris Cornell died, and I gasped out loud, and my son was like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I said, Chris Cornell passed away last night, and I couldn't believe it. So it has affected me, but I think the thing that I've really been affected by is the power of pharmaceutical drugs and what they can do to you. I mean, if there is a prime example of these celebrities who are mixing drugs together, or they can't keep track of the drugs they're on, so they're mixing medication. I mean, you can give a long list of actors, entertainers that have passed away over the past few years. You know, you look at Prince, you look at Tom Petty, you look at Chris Cornell, and it's become a tragedy all over the country with people being impacted by it and becoming addicted by it. And it also means that our entertainers, our favorite movie stars, our favorite musicians are also affected by it, and probably more because of the access they have due to the funds and the financial resources they have.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The fact that the accessibility is so easy, the fact that celebrities definitely have the money to do it, plus at the same time, not to get like super controversial, but a lot of doctors just want to prescribe these things because it's I don't know if it's easy, if it results in more money for them, or, you know, whatever the case may be. I think actual analysis of someone's mental or physical health is sacrificed over benefiting the pharmaceutical company.
I agree. You know, I know a lot of friends that are in pharmaceuticals that do pharmacy sales, pharmaceutical sales, and we all know that the doctors have these drugs pushed on them. They get kickbacks, they get benefits, they get trips to resorts, they get dinners, they get all these things. And that contributes to the nationwide situation with people becoming more and more addicted. And then when they take them off these drugs, they don't know what to do. So then they go into the harder stuff like heroin or crystal meth. They begin, stealing things and going into the system. It's a domino effect, and ultimately they lose. Very few people come out of it on the other side. And I hope, if nothing else, his legacy spotlights that. His legacy spotlights the fact that it can happen to anyone. And just because you're a rock star doesn't mean you're isolated from tragedy and isolated from overdosing and isolated from taking your own life because of the side effects. It really is a tragedy, and I hope the good that comes out of it is that, hey, you know, if you continue down this road and you continue down with this addiction to pharmaceuticals, you're going to possibly die. I mean, the likelihood of you dying is greater every time you take a pill.
Yeah. Yeah, it's especially with celebrities, it's almost bizarre to think about, but it's like it's a huge reality check anytime you hear of a celebrity dying in any situation. Most recently for me, I know this is a different circumstance, but Kobe Bryant. Things, accidents or any sort of, horrific incidents like that just goes to show, I mean, we're all human. Anything can happen, and we have to take steps to be able to prevent incidents like what happened to Chris and anybody else in the world.
It really is a tragedy, and it's important to appreciate his music. I was more of an Audioslave fan than a Soundgarden fan. I love Soundgarden, not to say I don't, but I always connected more with Audioslave. His solo work, his solo work is incredibly underrated, and it doesn't get the exposure that it should. Well, when you think of the 5 big bands from the grunge era, Stone Temple Pilots, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and Eddie Vedder is the only remaining frontman to carry on the legacy of that music. I mean, you could throw maybe Smashing Pumpkins in there, but I think the big 5, is what I just mentioned. It's incredible. And the way the other people have passed away, whether it's Kurt Cobain, whether it's Lane Staley, whether it's Scott Weiland or Chris Cornell, it's been due to drugs. It's been due to suicide, and it's just a tragedy.
Yeah, it really is.
Why do you think that commonality exists between those frontmen? Is it because of maybe the way they grew up? Is it because of, when you think of the grunge movement and you think of the big change from the 80s rock to the grunge movement, it had this seriousness and it had a underlying sadness also too as well. When you listen to the music, that those lyrics and the music were both coming from dark places. And I don't know why they all had that influence, although they had that style, but it was very common with all those bands.
It was. I would venture to say singers like Kurt Cobain and Lane Staley, they both had pretty chaotic childhoods. They came from broken homes. I believe Chris Cornell did as well. And it was in those 2 cases with Kurt Cobain and Lane Staley where they got into the really heavy drugs. And because of their experiences, they wrote really dark lyrics, really personal lyrics. Actually, the fact is they were so honest, much more honest compared to like 80s rock. Because, 80s rock is kind of associate them with like fantasies, like, fast cars and girls and
good times,
all night partying and all that. Good times, exactly. But the music that people like Chris Cornell or Lane Staley or Kurt Cobain or Eddie Vedder wrote, they were like honest, like very cerebral. I'm not sure if that's the right term, but very, very personal, a lot more honest and intimate. And it's hard to say exactly why most of those frontmen fell under that category of, tortured rock star, with, drug addicted and all that. But the sad thing is the media tends to focus more on that than their actual, musical legacy.
Yeah. And when you think about that music, it was the, anti-rock star. It was jeans and a flannel. There really wasn't much glam in that era. I do believe that era is the last of the rock scene. The Seattle rock scene really is, the last time America had a movement, had a scene, because since then it's been very fragmented, and I think a lot of that has to do with social media. But when you look back at what that area created in terms of Seattle, there hasn't been anything like that since. So in essence, they were also carrying that legacy too. I mean, they kind of killed the rock star as we know it, and it was also the last scene, that we ever experienced. That kids today, the youth of today, really don't have what we had. Myself with both the Sunset Strip movement and also then the Seattle movement.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's why, for me personally, I'm more involved in the local scene now, which is, in my opinion, a bigger scene, like, in my own, little circle than any other scene out there. Because there are a lot of bands who were heavily inspired by 90s music in my area. A lot of musicians I know, my friends, my partner, they were all inspired by that scene and many others. Yeah, it's like you said, nowadays it's harder to find. There is music out there that is heavily inspirational, but they're kind of their own. They kind of have their own little niche. It's not really like, you can't really categorize them into one big, subject or genre or commonality.
Well, you have the subgenres now. You have stoner rock, you
Yeah.
have nu metal, you have all these types of different subgenres. And in my opinion, I think that hurts the brand of rock music. For me, it's rock, hard rock, heavy metal, punk, and thrash. That's what it is, basically, for me. And I think when you get into some of the other subgenres, the listener who may like your music sees a label for your music and may pass on it without even listening to it. And I think I like simple. I like simplicity. I like, less is more. And I believe, when you talk about the subgenres or anything, I've had a couple quote unquote stoner rock bands on the show, whether it's La Chinga, whether it's 1000 Mods. I'm having Gorilla Riot on an upcoming episode. It just, for me, I'm not really geared towards the subgenres of rock music. I think it should be simple.
I agree. And that was my problem when I was a lot younger. Like, anytime I saw a certain label, like if it was something like, if anything was, pop or anything like that, I was so pretentious about it, and I'm like, oh God, never mind, I'm not going to get into that. Now I'm a lot more open-minded. Now I listen to pretty much anything, and I don't really care about labels anymore. I definitely agree with what you said there. Like, younger generations, not generations, just younger people tend to. There's always a time in somebody's life where they have a fixation on labels and they don't want to be associated with it or something. Like, I don't want to be associated with heavy metal, or I don't want to be associated with punk rock. And the older you get, the more you realize it's kind of ridiculous. But at the same time, it's like, I don't blame them because I was there.
Since his death, we've unfortunately seen the lawsuits go back and forth between Soundgarden and his widow. We've seen his family call out Eddie Vedder for not attending the memorial. We've seen his family call out his daughter with his first wife because of what she may have posted or what she may have said on social media. I don't know Chris personally. I never knew him, but I'd like to think that he would not want all this out there. He would not want all this to be happening.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There have been a lot of instances recently where I don't agree with what his widow Vicky is doing. It's really hard because it's like, I know, like you said, I didn't know Chris Cornell personally either, but I would definitely agree that this is not what he would want. It's all this drama, all of this, like, how torn his whole family has become, including his first daughter. And there's so much unfairness going around and so much, like, hostility. And it's like, that is not, that's not what the fans want to hear. That's definitely not what Chris would want to happen. And I definitely have my opinions about it, but I don't want to get like too controversial.
No,
but,
go ahead. No, seriously. What are your opinions? That's what I want to hear.
Honestly, I think there's such a huge rift like with that band now. I think his widow is being completely ridiculous, and I've even heard posts on social media about how she's very self-centered, very self-absorbed, not a decent person to be around. And the more I think about it, and especially with her recent actions, I kind of believe it. And it's really sad to think that someone like Chris, who seemed like such a kind-hearted person, was, associated with someone like Vicky, unfortunately.
Well, everybody grieves differently. Everybody has a way to do it. Some people grieve with sadness and depression. They fall into a depression during grieving. Some people celebrate one's life. Some people, it takes forever to get over something, and they grieve at their own process. I always believe grieving is very similar to fingerprints, where everybody has their own way to do it. No way is identical. And it's obvious that, in my opinion, just from reading and seeing what I see, Vicky has taken the anger route of mourning, where, she's put up barriers and she's fighting everything, and she's lashing out and filing lawsuits and doing things that hurt the legacy of her late husband, Chris Cornell. I think what you just said, it's hard to imagine Chris Cornell being associated with this person. And I know there's a lot that we don't know, and I will say that.
Absolutely.
And there's two sides to every story. But I wish things would remain kind of under the radar, where you don't hear about everything that happens. You don't hear about every lawsuit that's filed, or you don't hear about every disagreement. And I don't know what side that's coming from, whether it's Soundgarden or whether it's Vicky's side. But it all started when I think her mother attacked Eddie Vedder for not attending the memorial. And Eddie responded by saying that he just couldn't go. And that's, like I said, everybody has a different way of mourning. No way is right. It would have been great for Eddie to be there because him and Chris were great friends. But also, there's the running away part of mourning. There's not wanting to face what happened. And Eddie has lost a lot of people that were friends from that movement. And I think Chris has probably impacted him more than anybody. And I just think that he couldn't do it. But to call him out publicly like that is just obnoxious and irresponsible. And I
agree.
I don't feel that you should call out someone because they're grieving in a way that you don't approve of. I'm sure Eddie wanted to be there. I'm sure Eddie just couldn't be there because of just all the emotion that he was going through, and he needed to escape and continue with his music because that's maybe how he grieves. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing, saying, implying that Eddie didn't care about Chris by not showing up is completely off base, completely ridiculous. Yeah. And I felt that's kind of where it started.
It twists the knife of already losing one of your closest friends. And I just, as soon as I heard that, I'm like, it's so wrong. It's not fair to Eddie. It's not fair to Chris, and it's not fair to the rest of his family, because I remember the mother-in-law was kind of bringing one of his daughters into it, saying, "You made her cry, when you said you couldn't come." And it's like, if that's not what his daughter wanted, it's like, don't involve her in this.
Yeah. I thought that was a huge misstep in terms of doing that. I can imagine them not being happy about Eddie not being there, but you find the proper channel to express your disappointment. You don't use the press. You don't use social media or whatever tool that you do to call out someone who is grieving. And to think that Eddie didn't care is just wrong. And I think that was a big mistake. And then we moved from that to his daughter from his first marriage, who, I forget what was the circumstance where she claimed that she never got something or whatever, and then Vicky called her out in social media. This is the daughter of your husband who died, and you're calling her out in the press again and in social media. What are you doing? What are you doing?
I know. It's so ridiculous. I think the context of that was she was not receiving the adequate amount of funds that she needed because she left college for a little while for mental health reasons, and Vicky used that as an excuse to cut her off from her father's estate, which is incredibly wrong. And honestly, I know this is a strong word, but that was absolutely disgusting. And unfortunately, it probably stems from the fact that she is not Vicky's daughter. She is Susan Silver's daughter, Chris Cornell's first wife's daughter. And it's just so wrong. And I feel like she is she has faced a lot of struggles more so. And it's almost like she's like one of the greatest victims in this whole situation, because there's so much. She's been completely alienated from the rest of his family, and I know, again, that's not what he would have wanted.
Right, and especially too with her mental health issues, that's got to be even more difficult, for her. I mean, she's also, a young person. She's a young gal, and she's trying to find her way through life, and this tragedy happens. And instead of supporting her, instead of understanding, you basically completely rid yourself of her existence in your family. So now Chris's kids with Vicky, I don't know what's happened since then, but don't have the relationship with their sister, whether Vicky wants to admit it or not. That is their sister. And this is the blood of her husband. When you marry into a family that is an existing family that has kids, sons, daughters, and the partner that you're with has children, if you're not willing to love and treat those kids like your own, then you shouldn't get married to that person. You shouldn't be involved with that person, because ultimately you're marrying the person and the kids in the family. And, I don't know what Vicky's issue is. I don't know. Maybe she was always like this, and I don't know. I don't know the circumstances between Chris and Vicky, but it just seems like the worst possible things you could do to individuals, whether it's Eddie Vedder, whether it's his daughter from a first marriage, you're doing them. You're making bad decisions. I know you're angry. I know you're upset about your husband dying, but that doesn't mean that you need to lash out and be irresponsible in your decision makings and then use social media and the press to convey what you're thinking or to tell everyone your thoughts, because it's just not the proper place and not the proper circumstance under, the situation of Chris dying.
Exactly. And it's like using social media as, a way to rant or, spread negativity. It's like you're not setting a good example for your kids. And the fact that all we hear in the news recently regarding Chris Cornell is this whole dispute between Vicky and the rest of the band members, it's so disheartening, because it's like we talked about before. She's hurting his legacy, even though his legacy, I believe, is his own. And this is just an extremely unfortunate situation. But I believe that at the end of the day, no one can, not even her, can actually take away from everything that Chris created, everything that Chris left for his fans, his kids, and, like I said, so many people around the world.
I agree. You're reading all the back and forth between Soundgarden and Vicky in terms of lawsuits. This one's suing that one's suing this one. And I do believe his legacy is his own, but I also believe that, unfortunately, this will always be footnotes in his legacy of what happened afterwards, and that's disappointing. I don't believe Soundgarden is trying to do anything out of the ordinary or whatever. I do believe that they should control their music. I do believe that they are a band. Vicky is not part of the band, and I'm sure, I don't know what the issues are. If you do, please share them with the audience. But the fact that this has gone on and they're trading lawsuits, and based on Vicky's history, I got to look at it and go, Vicky, just why are you doing this? Like you are set for life. You are never going to have a worry. Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to tear everybody down that was associated with Chris?
Exactly. My personal opinion is two reasons. Unfortunately, one is definitely greed. She does seem like, because the epicenter of this is money, and that's pretty much, that's the basic explanation for it. But I believe the context of the lawsuit is the members of Soundgarden, they have demo tracks of Chris's vocals, as well as some music tracks set up that they were going to release for their next album. And it seems like they have enough to, release these songs, but Vicky believes that she wasn't getting paid enough in royalties. There was money that she was owed, and that those tracks don't belong to the band. They belong to Vicky, and she decides what she can do with them. And she doesn't want them released unless she gets enough money, which is so wrong, because I know there are tons of fans and the band members themselves that want those songs out, released. And I would love to hear them, but unfortunately, they're probably not going to be released for years, because I know some of us know lawsuits can last a ridiculously long time.
I don't know how she can think that music is hers, considering that they were not married when he was in Soundgarden, at least originally. And
right, exactly.
This is part of the band. The band, you're not in a band that includes wives unless you're, Paul McCartney and Wings. So, I just think that for her to do that and for her to stop what is happening, and I'm sure they're probably just giving her the normal rate on percentage-wise. I mean, I don't know. I have no idea, but for her to get anything at this point is just a bonus from the band. Whether it's half of whatever what Chris would have got, or a third, or whatever. It's just disappointing, and again, it's hurting the fans, which Chris loved. And again, Chris would not want any of this. Chris would want this stuff released. He'd want people to celebrate his life. And unfortunately, his widow is doing things that you shouldn't do. And I just think that, there's a right and wrong in everything. And sometimes doing the right thing is the hardest thing, but you have to do it. And it's not like Chris left her, empty-handed. It's not like probably Chris probably left her set up. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I can imagine with all the music he created and his worth and his estate, I'm sure she's not going to have any issues with finances for the rest of her life. So I don't, exactly. I mean, you mentioned greed. How much money do you need before you realize that you're screwing the fans and you're screwing his legacy by not moving forward and celebrating his life? I just think that's a misstep, a big misstep. And once again, decision making. I just think greed is probably the greatest way to describe it. And it's a shame because Chris came from pretty much nothing, came from a broken home. He would want his fans to hear all this stuff. He would want his fans to embrace it.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, as for Vicky, I think the other reason why it's like we were talking about before, this is another way of her grieving, because if you see her social media posts outside of, her attacking other people, she talks about how much she's hurting. And that's where it's like, I feel so bad for her, but at the same time, it's so hard because it's like, why are you doing this? The rest of the band members just want to spread positivity, and she's just so bitter, and it's so sad to see. But I don't know if part of it is also in her nature, because like I said, there were people who have met her before when Chris was still alive and said she was kind of an awful person. Not kind of, absolutely an awful person. And it's really a shame. But I think a combination of that grief mixed with that sort of personality is just so harmful to the person themselves and the people around them.
I also believe it has to do with the sudden loss. I think people grieve like Vicky is, the anger, the turning away, the running away, when a person's here one moment and they're gone the next, without any type of warning. I think when you understand you're going to be losing someone through a disease or through a sickness or, a tragedy, and you have time to prepare for it, I think you grieve differently than when someone commits suicide or overdoses or someone who tragically dies in a car accident or whatever. I think that impacts how you grieve and how you mourn. And I think we're seeing that with Vicky.
I agree. I definitely agree.
I
trying to remember what else. Yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
I also believe the same thing is also with Vanessa Bryant. You mentioned Kobe Bryant before. The sudden passing of Kobe. You have the sadness, but then you start to get angry because that person's not there anymore, and you lash out. And fortunately, Vanessa seems to be doing more to suppress things. I know she sued the helicopter company and the helicopter pilot for wrongful death. We don't know the circumstances of why they flew into the weather that they flew into. Maybe that'll all come out in the lawsuit. But yeah, I just think it's when somebody tragically dies suddenly, I think your grieving process is much harder and much longer.
Yeah. I know in the beginning, Vicky was, she wanted to sue the pharmaceutical company for wrongful death. And, in that case, I don't disagree with her. I think, but the sad thing is, especially when someone dies suddenly, the people who are left, especially the widows, it seems like in both scenarios, they're looking for someone to blame. I think in Vicky's case, part of her may blame herself, which, it's not her fault, but she may think that, and that's why she's, taking it out on the band members, taking it out on, part of his family. And it's so sad to see, and really digging into like the psychological motives behind it. It's it's a guess. It's an absolute guess. I'm not saying this is fact. I'm just giving my opinion because we don't know what exactly is going through her head or what goes through anyone's head when they're grieving, but it's definitely a possibility.
When you think of his music and you think of his legacy, what's the song or performance that helps you cope with losing him as a fan?
Well, recently I watched his one of Soundgarden's concerts from 2013, live from the Artist Den, and I was actually watching it with my mom because she's the one who introduced me to Soundgarden. She's as big of a Chris Cornell fan as I am, and it's like watching those songs, watching him perform like that, you almost forget about all of the sad parts of his legacy, unfortunately, and that also includes like his older performances. Like there's an MTV performance from 1996 that everyone always talks about, everyone always shares on social media and reposts and all that, and there are just too many to count, in my opinion. Anything from the Super Unknown album that he performs or that you can just listen to is that really is a masterpiece of an album.
When you look back at his legacy, it's obvious that he's one of the greatest singers of all time in rock history. And his voice is so recognizable, and that will always be how his legacy endures anything. And two monster bands, Soundgarden, that helped the grunge movement, and Audioslave, which was this modern rock band that came along when rock was really struggling, and it still continues to. But you have these two great bands. You have his solo career that just has these incredibly written songs. It's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking of the tragedy, but it's important to still connect with that music. It's important to still enjoy that music. You know, I often say when someone does lose someone, and I've even been told this when I've lost someone, that sooner or later the tears turn into laughter and smiles. And as we are at the 3-year mark of his anniversary, it's time to start smiling when you listen to his music. It's time to stop thinking of the tragedy. It's time to start reconnecting with those songs that meant so much to you, because they are great songs. They're great lyrically, sonically, musically. They're all fantastic. And I think as we continue forward, I think that'll happen more. I think when these footnotes of his legacy hopefully die down and hopefully go away, I think people will be able to move forward. And hopefully one day these demos that Soundgarden has will see the light of day so people can continue to celebrate his life, because that's really all that it's about.
Absolutely. That's, I think it's like you said, once enough time passes, and it's definitely, it's been almost 3 years now, which is really unbelievable to think about. But I think a good positive takeaway is the more time that passes, the more that we're able to focus less on the tragedy and, let those, wounds, whether it's as a fan or as a band member, fellow band member, or, a member of his family, once that pain goes away, you can focus on, exactly what he left behind, an amazing discography, so many albums from, like 4 different bands, Temple of the Dog as well as another one that I've never been able to stop listening to. His solo work, Audioslave, Soundgarden, that's never going to go away.
Even when someone leaves us, they stay with us, and you just mentioned the music's never going to go away. And I think that's an awesome way to put it, is we'll always have it. We'll always be able to connect with it. And maybe it was hard for people to listen to right after his passing, but I think we're at the point now where if you haven't already, you should start to celebrate his life more, and you should really dive into his music, because it's unbelievable. I mean, I was a late comer to the grunge movement because I was such an 80s rock fan that when all that started to change over and occur, I resisted it. But Soundgarden and Alice in Chains, as I've said before, were always the two bands that I connected with right off the bat, because they were more hard rock, they were more metal than the other bands that were coming out. So, I've been able to listen to his music and enjoy it. I've been able to dive into it and reconnect with some songs that I had forgotten about or maybe haven't listened to in a while. And I think that's the important with grieving as a fan, that you'll always have his music, you'll always have his performances. You can go on YouTube and watch whatever. And hopefully, we do see some unreleased stuff, whether it's through Soundgarden, whether it's through Audioslave. The one person that really hasn't been, in the what do they call it, the crosshairs of Vicky has been Tom Morello. And I think, he's probably playing his cards close to the vest, and he's probably seeing how the Soundgarden stuff plays out. But I'm sure he's got stuff with Chris that maybe is unreleased too as well.
I agree. Absolutely. I definitely think there is some unreleased Audioslave material out there, which I would be incredibly excited to hear. And yeah, it's like you said, I think Tom Morello has rightfully so been able to distance himself a little more from the drama. And you even see, like, I would say once a week or every other week, he's always posting something about Chris Cornell, like sharing a memory or posting an old picture or, anything from an old concert or saying, hey, this happened like 15 years ago. This was incredible, and that is the way to honor someone like Chris Cornell or any musician like ever who unfortunately passed away too soon.
Do you think Soundgarden will ever regroup with a different singer? I mean, we've seen Stone Temple Pilots do it. We've seen Alice in Chains do it. What are your thoughts on that?
I personally don't think it's going to happen. I know Kim Sale, the guitarist for Soundgarden, said almost right away, Soundgarden is definitely done, but the other members, Kim Sale, Ben Shepherd, and Matt Cameron, all want to still make music. Of course, Matt Cameron is in Pearl Jam, and I bet there's going to be a project of the three of them together that may definitely happen, but I definitely don't see, and I honestly don't think it should happen. I don't see them forming again as Soundgarden with a different singer. Alice in Chains and Stone Temple Pilots got incredibly lucky with the singers they found, and they're still able to, not only make music together, but find, a pretty decent amount of success, and that's fantastic. But as for Soundgarden, Soundgarden is kind of a different case, and since the band members sort of confirmed it, I definitely think that chapter of their book is closed.
Growing up as a Soundgarden fan, as a Chris Cornell fan, what is your favorite memory of him and how it affected you?
Let's see, favorite memory. I would say recently, when I was 15, the whole summer before my sophomore year of high school, I listened to nothing but Chris Cornell's solo work, and Soundgarden and Audioslave, but I would listen to his solo album Carry On repeat, on a complete loop, back to back, just over and over again. And, being home alone because I wasn't in school and just being able to, go throughout the house blasting his music was such a fun time. And introducing friends to his music and someone actually saying, oh my God, this is really good. What else can you show me? That's the best feeling when you're able to successfully share music that you love with somebody else.
Well, Ari, it's been a blast. Thanks for coming back on the show. Thanks for talking about Chris. Thanks for doing this. I really do appreciate it. It's been 3 years and it hasn't gotten any easier in remembering him, but at least when I listen to the music, and hopefully a lot of people feel the same way, the music brings me joy rather than sadness, and I hope that's happening for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you so much, Jay.
Well, that's Ari Karnezis, and this is Jay Scott of The Hook Rocks, the Ultimate Rock Community Podcast. Hope you're staying well. Hope you're staying healthy. We'll talk again soon. Thank you.